He thought throwing her out would prove his authority, but he had no idea he had just ruined everything. Before we go any further, where are you watching from? Drop your city below, and if you believe respect should never depend on appearance, stay with this story, because what happened next changed everything. The glass doors of the showroom slid open with a soft hiss as Sophia Bennett stepped inside. Her worn sneakers quiet against the polished marble floors that reflected the warm golden lights above. Luxury cars lined up like sculptures worth more than most homes, and every detail in the room whispered exclusivity, from tailored suits to designer handbags. Yet Sophia moved through it all with calm, steady eyes, her simple gray sweater and faded jeans making her look almost invisible, almost like she didn't belong. And that was exactly what they saw. A young salesman glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Already deciding she wasn't worth his time, another whispered something under his breath, a smirk spreading across his face. And just like that, the room had made its judgment. Sophia paused beside a midnight blue coupe, her fingers lightly brushing the smooth surface, her reflection faint in the paint, her expression unreadable, as if she had seen rooms like this 1,000 times before, as if none of this impressed her. And that subtle confidence made one man notice. Blake Turner, the floor manager, adjusted his cufflinks as he walked toward her, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the floor, his smile practiced but cold, the kind of smile that measured people before speaking. "Ma'am, can I help you?" he asked, though his tone already suggested she didn't belong. Sophia turned slightly, her voice calm and respectful. "I'd like to ask about this model," she said, gesturing gently, but Blake's eyes had already scanned her from head to toe, taking in every detail he thought mattered, and dismissing her in a second. "That vehicle starts at $280,000, he replied, his voice louder now, just enough for others nearby to hear. "We usually reserve it for serious buyers." A quiet ripple of amusement passed through the room. A couple nearby exchanged glances, someone chuckled softly, and just like that, the air shifted. What had been subtle judgment became something public, something deliberate. Sophia didn't react, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged, and that silence, that refusal to shrink, only seemed to irritate him more. Blake stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound polite, but still cutting. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable looking at something more accessible," he added, gesturing vaguely toward the exit. And in that moment, the room leaned in, waiting, watching, measuring what she would do next. But Sophia simply stood there, calm, composed, as if she knew something they didn't, and for a brief second, something in Blake's expression flickered, uncertainty, quickly buried under arrogance, because in his world, people like her always left quietly, and he was certain this would be no different. But he was wrong, completely wrong, and he was about to find out why. Blake's smile tightened as Sophia did not move, did not apologize, did not shrink the way he expected, and that small defiance seemed to echo louder than any words in the polished room, drawing more attention from nearby customers who now openly watched the exchange unfold. He cleared his throat and straightened his jacket, shifting from polite dismissal to something sharper, more deliberate. "Ma'am, I think there has been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice carrying just enough to command the room. "This showroom operates by appointment for clients who are prepared to make serious purchases." The phrase "serious purchases" hung in the air like a quiet accusation, and a few people nodded subtly, reinforcing the unspoken hierarchy that governed the space. Sophia's gaze remained steady on the car, her fingers tracing the edge of the door handle, as if she were considering something far beyond his words. And for a brief moment, her silence unsettled him again, but he quickly masked it with confidence, stepping slightly to block her view of the vehicle, asserting control in a way that felt practiced, almost routine. "If you would like, I can have someone direct you to our online catalog," he added, now gesturing toward the entrance, his patience thinning as the seconds stretched. "Or perhaps another dealership that better fits your needs." A faint chuckle came from somewhere behind him, and the room seemed to lean further into the moment, curiosity mixing with quiet judgment. Sophia finally lifted her eyes to meet his, calm and unwavering, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "I only asked about the car," she said, nothing more. No challenge, no explanation, Just a simple statement that somehow made his response feel excessive. Blake exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening as he realized the situation was slipping from casual dismissal into something more visible, more public than he intended. And that realization pushed him further, not back, because in his world, losing control in front of an audience was not an option. He turned slightly, catching the attention of a security attendant near the front, a subtle nod passing between them, an unspoken signal that this needed to end. "I am going to have to ask you to leave," Blake said, now dropping the pretense entirely, his tone firm, authoritative, leaving no room for negotiation. And for the first time, the words landed heavily in the space, creating a ripple that moved through the onlookers, some shifting uncomfortably, others watching more intently. Sophia did not argue, did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him for a brief second longer, as if memorizing something unseen, then gave a small nod, a gesture so composed it almost felt out of place in the tension surrounding them. And without another word, she turned toward the exit, her steps measured, unhurried, the sound of her sneakers soft against the marble as the doors slid open once more. Behind her, the room exhaled, the moment dissolving into quiet murmurs, Blake adjusting his cufflinks again as if restoring order, convincing himself it was handled, finished, just another situation resolved. But something lingered in the air, something unspoken, because as the doors closed behind Sophia, the story did not feel over. It felt like it had just begun, and somewhere deep down, though he would never admit it, Blake felt it too. The glass doors had barely settled back into place when the low, unmistakable hum of engines rolled across the front of the showroom, deep and controlled, the kind of sound that did not belong to ordinary traffic. And one by one, heads began to turn, conversations cutting off mid-sentence as three black SUVs pulled up in perfect sequence, their glossy surfaces reflecting the city lights like moving mirrors. Inside, Blake was mid-explanation to a well-dressed couple when the shift in atmosphere caught his attention, subtle at first, then undeniable, like a ripple spreading through still water, and he paused, just for a second, glancing toward the entrance with a faint crease forming between his brows. Outside, Sophia had not walked far. She stood just beyond the glass, calm as ever, her posture unchanged, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. And when the first SUV door opened, a man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped out with precision, his expression focused, scanning the surroundings with immediate recognition. Then, without hesitation, he moved toward her. Inside the showroom, a young salesman leaned closer to the window, whispering something under his breath, confusion mixing with curiosity, while another employee straightened instinctively, sensing something important without fully understanding it. And then it happened. The man reached Sophia, his tone urgent but respectful. "Miss Bennett, we have been trying to reach you," he said, his voice carrying just enough to slip through the glass as the doors opened again. And suddenly, the room that had dismissed her only moments ago fell into a strange, suspended silence. Blake stepped forward, unconsciously, his earlier confidence flickering as he watched the interaction unfold, his mind racing to place the scene, to understand the sudden shift in energy that now filled the space. And when the man gestured toward the showroom with a deferential nod, something inside Blake tightened. Sophia turned slightly, her gaze moving back toward the interior she had just been removed from, not with anger, not with triumph, but with quiet certainty. And as she stepped forward again, the same doors that had closed behind her moments ago slid open once more, this time without resistance, without question. The sound of her footsteps returning echoed differently now, heavier somehow, not in volume, but in meaning, and every pair of eyes in the room followed her, the earlier smirks gone, replaced with uncertainty, even unease. Blake felt it fully now, that subtle but undeniable shift in control, the kind that could not be explained but could be felt in every glance, every breath. And as Sophia walked back inside, the man beside her speaking quietly, respectfully, Blake's rehearsed authority began to unravel piece by piece. Though he had not yet heard the words that would change everything, not yet understood who she truly was, but the realization was already beginning to take shape, slow and inevitable. And the room, once so certain of its judgment, now waited in complete silence. Blake felt the shift completely now. Not just in the room, but in himself, as if the ground beneath his authority had quietly begun to move. And when Sophia stepped fully back into the showroom, the man beside her stopping just half a step behind in clear deference, the difference was undeniable, not in what she wore, not in how she walked, but in how the space responded to her presence. Conversations did not resume. No one laughed. No one whispered. The room held its breath, and Blake, who had controlled every moment minutes ago, now found himself searching for words that no longer came as easily. The man in the charcoal suit turned slightly, addressing him with calm precision. "Is there a reason Miss Bennett was asked to leave?" he asked, his tone not aggressive but firm, the kind of tone that did not need to be raised to carry weight. And the question hung in the air longer than it should have, stretching the silence into something almost tangible. Blake opened his mouth, then hesitated, his mind racing through the last few minutes, replaying his own words, his gestures, the smirks from the room that now felt like echoes of a mistake he could no longer undo. "There must have been a misunderstanding," he said finally, forcing a controlled smile that did not quite reach his eyes. But even as he spoke, he could feel the shift, the loss of certainty that had once defined him. Sophia said nothing, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. And somehow that silence spoke louder than any accusation could have. It placed the weight of the moment entirely on him, and everyone in the room felt it. The man beside her gave a small nod, as if confirming something already known, then spoke again, this time slower, each word deliberate. "Miss Bennett is the majority stakeholder of this dealership group," he said, and for a fraction of a second, the words did not register. They seemed to pass through the room without meaning, until they settled, until they connected, and when they did, everything changed. Blake froze mid-breath, the practiced confidence in his expression cracking just enough to reveal what lay beneath. Disbelief first, then realization, and finally something far heavier, something that could not be hidden, because the room had already seen it. A quiet gasp came from somewhere near the back, a customer stepping slightly away as if the air itself had shifted, and the same employees who had ignored her now stood completely still, their earlier assumptions collapsing in silence. Sophia finally moved, not forward, not back, just a slight turn of her head as her eyes met Blake's again, calm, unwavering. And in that moment, the power dynamic that had once seemed so clear reversed entirely, without a single raised voice, without a single dramatic gesture, just truth revealing itself in the most undeniable way. Blake's hands tightened slightly at his sides, his rehearsed composure struggling to hold as he searched for something to say, something that could repair what had already been done, but the words would not come, because some moments do not allow correction, only recognition. And as the silence deepened, stretching across the marble floor and into every corner of the room, one thing became painfully clear to everyone watching. Respect had never been about what she wore. It had been about what they failed to see. Blake's throat tightened as the weight of the revelation settled fully into the room. The polished confidence he had worn like armor now feeling fragile, almost misplaced, and for the first time since Sophia had walked in, he was no longer the one controlling the moment. He was standing inside it, exposed by it. "Miss Bennett, he began, but the words faltered, incomplete, because there was no rehearsed response for this, no script for undoing something so public, so immediate, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything he could have said. Sophia stepped forward slightly, her presence calm, grounded, not elevated by power but steady in a way that made it undeniable, and when she spoke, her voice remained the same as before, quiet, composed, untouched by the tension that surrounded her. "You asked me to leave," she said simply, not accusing, not emotional, just stating a fact that now carried a different meaning entirely. Blake swallowed, his eyes flicking briefly toward the staff who now avoided his gaze, toward the customers who watched with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, and then back to her, realizing that every second stretched this moment further beyond his control. "I did not realize," he tried again, but the sentence dissolved before it could form, because realization had come too late. Sophia held his gaze for a brief moment, then let it pass, as if the point had already been made. as if there was nothing left to prove, and that quiet restraint shifted the room once more, from tension into something reflective, something heavier. The man beside her remained still, observing, allowing her to lead, reinforcing without words that whatever happened next would be her decision alone. A faint movement rippled through the staff, one employee straightening, another stepping back, each silently recalibrating their understanding of the situation, of her, of themselves. Sophia turned her attention back to the car she had first approached, the midnight blue coupe still gleaming under the lights, unchanged, unaffected by everything that had just unfolded, and she placed her hand gently on its surface again, as if returning to where the moment had begun. "I was interested in this model," she said, her tone even, the same request she had made before. But now the room heard it differently. Now it carried weight, not because of her title, but because of what had just been revealed about how easily it had been dismissed. Blake nodded quickly, stepping aside without hesitation this time, the space opening in a way it never had before. "Of course," he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier edge. "I would be happy to show you everything." And in that shift, subtle but unmistakable, the reversal was complete. Sophia did not smile, did not acknowledge the change directly. She simply allowed it, accepting the new reality without needing to emphasize it. And as she stood there, calm and composed, the room began to understand something far deeper than the reveal itself, something that lingered beneath the polished floors and quiet walls, that respect, once denied, cannot be reclaimed through words alone. And that day, without raising her voice, without demanding anything, Sophia Bennett reminded everyone watching exactly what dignity looks like. The room did not return to normal. Not immediately, because something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface, something that could not simply be reset by polite smiles or professional tones. And as Blake began explaining the features of the midnight blue coupe, his voice carried a careful precision now, each word measured, each gesture restrained, as if he were walking through unfamiliar ground where every step mattered. "This model features a twin-turbo engine with over 500 horsepower, he said, opening the door with deliberate respect, no longer blocking her view, but inviting it. And the difference was unmistakable, not just in his tone, but in the way he positioned himself slightly behind her, allowing space where before there had been control. Sophia leaned in slightly, observing the interior, her expression thoughtful, not impressed, not dismissive, simply attentive, as if evaluating something beyond the surface details being presented. And that quiet focus held the room in place, no one interrupting, no one daring to break the atmosphere that had settled like a still frame. A few steps away, the staff watched in silence, their earlier confidence replaced by a careful awareness, each of them now reconsidering the assumptions they had made just minutes ago. And even the customers who had once found the moment amusing now stood quietly, as if witnessing something far more significant than a simple sales interaction. Blake continued, pointing out specifications, materials, custom options, his voice steady but softened, stripped of its earlier edge, and yet beneath that professionalism, there was something else, something closer to reflection than performance, because he knew, whether he admitted it or not, that this was no longer about selling a car. It was about confronting a moment he could not undo. Sophia stepped back from the vehicle, her hand resting lightly on the door for a second before she let it close, the soft click echoing gently in the room. And when she turned to face him again, her expression remained composed, but her eyes carried a quiet clarity that made the entire space feel smaller. "It is a beautiful car," she said, her voice even, acknowledging the object without elevating it beyond what it was. And Blake nodded quickly, almost relieved to hear something familiar, something safe. "It truly is," he replied. But the conversation did not return to what it once was, because the weight of everything that had happened still lingered between them. Sophia glanced briefly around the showroom, her gaze passing over the employees, the customers, the polished surfaces and quiet corners. And in that moment, it felt as though she was not just seeing the space, but understanding it, measuring it in a way that went far beyond appearances. When her eyes returned to Blake, there was no anger there, no desire to embarrass him or reclaim power through humiliation. only a calm awareness that made what came next far more impactful than anything louder could have been. And the room, already silent, seemed to lean in once more, waiting, because everyone could feel it. The moment was not over yet, and whatever she chose to say next would not just define him. It would define what this place truly stood for. Sophia let the silence linger just long enough for everyone in the room to feel it, not as tension, but as awareness. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, steady, carrying effortlessly across the polished space without needing to rise. "Tell me something," she said, her eyes resting on Blake, but her words meant for everyone. "When I walked in earlier, what did you see?" The question was simple, almost gentle, yet it landed heavier than anything before, because there was no immediate answer that could undo what had already been revealed. Blake hesitated, his mind searching for something safe, something acceptable, but the truth stood too clearly between them, reflected not just in his memory but in the faces around him, the employees who had looked away, the customers who had watched, the quiet acknowledgement that they had all seen the same thing and chosen the same assumption. "I thought," he began, then stopped, the words catching, because finishing that sentence would require admitting more than he was ready to say, and the pause itself became its own answer. Sophia gave a small nod, not in agreement, but in recognition, as if she had expected nothing less. "You thought I did not belong," she said, completing the thought for him without accusation, without emotion, just clarity, and the room absorbed it in complete silence. She took a slow step forward, her gaze moving briefly across the showroom, over the staff who now stood still, over the customers who no longer pretended not to listen, and then back to Blake. "That is the part that matters," she continued, her tone still even. "Not the car, not the sale, not even this moment." She gestured lightly around them. "But how quickly people decide what someone is worth without ever asking a single question." The words did not come as a lecture. They came as a reflection, simple and undeniable, and that made them impossible to ignore. Blake lowered his eyes for a brief second, the weight of what she was saying settling in a way no correction or apology could erase, because this was no longer about one mistake. It was about something deeper, something that extended beyond him into the culture of the room itself. Sophia paused again, allowing the meaning to settle, then added quietly, "Respect should not depend on appearance." And the sentence, though soft, carried through the space with finality, not as a reprimand, but as a standard that had just been clearly drawn. The man beside her remained silent, his presence reinforcing the gravity of the moment without needing to add to it. And for a brief second, no one moved, no one spoke, as if the entire showroom had been reset by a truth it could no longer ignore. Blake straightened slightly, not to regain control, but to stand within that realization. And when he finally spoke, his voice was different, stripped of performance. "You are right," he said quietly, and for the first time, it was not about being heard, it was about being understood. Sophia gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not accepting, not rejecting, simply acknowledging that the moment had reached its purpose. And as the silence settled once more, it was no longer uncomfortable, it was reflective, leaving everyone in the room with the same unspoken question lingering in their minds. What had they seen when she first walked in? And more importantly, what had they chosen not to see? The silence that followed did not feel like pressure anymore. It felt like clarity settling into every corner of the showroom. And for the first time since Sophia had walked through those doors, people were not watching her because of what they assumed. They were watching her because of what they had just learned about themselves. Sophia let her gaze move one last time across the room, not searching, not judging, simply observing, as if taking in the full weight of what had just unfolded. And then she turned her attention back to Blake, her expression unchanged, calm and composed, but now carrying something deeper, something final. "I did not come here to make a point," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I came here because I liked the car." And that simple statement, so ordinary on the surface, landed with unexpected weight, because it stripped away all the tension, all the assumptions, and brought the moment back to its beginning, reminding everyone how easily something simple had been turned into something else. Blake nodded slowly, the movement careful, respectful, no longer automatic, and there was no attempt to interrupt, No effort to steer the conversation, only a quiet acceptance of the space she now held. Sophia stepped slightly closer to the car again, her hand resting gently on its surface as she considered it for a brief moment. Then she looked back at Blake, her eyes steady. "I will take it," she said, her tone even, without emphasis, without display. And yet the words carried through the room like a quiet resolution, not dramatic, not triumphant, just certain. A subtle shift moved through the staff, a mixture of surprise and something else, something closer to reflection than reaction, as if the decision itself was not the point, but everything that had led to it. Blake straightened, his response immediate but measured. "Of course," he said, his voice respectful in a way it had not been before. "We will prepare everything right away." And there was no trace of his earlier tone, no hint of dismissal, only professionalism, shaped now by awareness. Sophia gave a small nod, then paused for just a second longer, her gaze lifting slightly, not to dominate the room, but to acknowledge it, to recognize that what had happened here would not be forgotten easily, not by him, not by them, and not by anyone who had witnessed it. She turned then, beginning to walk toward the exit once more, but this time, no one looked away, no one whispered. The space opened naturally around her, not out of obligation, but out of something that felt closer to respect. The man beside her followed quietly, and as the glass doors slid open again, the light outside spilling in softly, the room remained still, watching as she stepped out without hurry, without looking back, leaving behind not just a completed transaction, but a moment that had quietly redefined everything. And as the doors closed once more, sealing the silence behind her, Blake stood there for a second longer than necessary, his reflection faint in the polished surface of the car she had chosen, understanding now, in a way he had not before, that some lessons do not come from losing something. They come from realizing what should have been there all along. The showroom did not return to its usual rhythm even after Sophia was gone, the polished floors still reflecting a moment that no one inside could quite shake. And for a long time, no one spoke, not because they were unsure what to say, but because they finally understood what should have been obvious from the beginning. Blake remained where he stood, his gaze resting on the midnight blue coupe that had become something more than just a car, a quiet reminder of how easily perception can mislead and how quickly assumptions can define a moment before truth has a chance to speak. And as he exhaled slowly, the weight of it settled fully, not as embarrassment, but as awareness. Around him, the staff began to move again, but differently now, more deliberate, more attentive, as if each interaction carried a new level of meaning, a new understanding that every person who walked through those doors brought a story that could not be measured by appearance alone. One of the younger employees glanced toward the entrance, then back at Blake, as if silently asking whether things would go back to normal, but Blake did not answer, because he knew they would not completely, not after this. Outside, the SUVs had already disappeared into the flow of the city, their presence as quiet in departure as it had been in arrival, and Sophia Bennett was gone, leaving behind no demand, no spectacle, only a moment that had shifted the foundation of the room without force or confrontation. Blake finally moved, stepping closer to the car, his reflection faint against its polished surface, and for a brief second, he saw not the manager he had been earlier, but the man who had made a decision too quickly, who had spoken without understanding, and who had now been given something far more valuable than a sale, the chance to see clearly. He placed a hand lightly on the car, then withdrew it, as if acknowledging something unspoken, something that did not belong to him to hold. And when he turned back toward the showroom, his posture was different, not weaker, but grounded in something more real, something earned. The customers who had witnessed everything began to leave one by one, their conversations quieter, more thoughtful, and the laughter that had once filled the room did not return, replaced instead by a subtle awareness that lingered in every corner. And as the doors opened again for the next person to walk in, no one rushed to judge. No one assumed, because the room had learned something it would not easily forget, that respect is not something given to status. It is something owed to every person who walks through the door. And that day, without raising her voice, without asking for anything, Sophia Bennett reminded them all what dignity looks like, and the room, at last, understood.